Jay Pomachet.
Labour aren't coming in, are they not?
Sorry?
Labour aren't speaking.
I'm calling you.
I didn't think I was up this early.
If you wish, if you don't want to take the slot.
Well, I could have done with 10 more minutes to prepare myself, but nonetheless.
The clock has started.
Sure. Thanks, Last Count Corley. Well, Minister, I suppose the thing that strikes you about the regular pronouncements about the urgency to deal with climate change and big summits where commitments are made to do that is that almost immediately after those summits, the whole thing starts to unravel. So we have grand-sounding and noble-sounding aspirations and a lot of PR that we're going to do something about climate change, and then very, very quickly after that we discover that actually individual players who are quite happy to sort of engage in the trumpeting of their commitment on this matter quickly begin to back away from any real action on it. And then the facts, if you like, the actual facts of climate change come out and suggest that actually the situation is getting worse, despite all the promises that serious action is going to be taken and urgent action is going to be taken. And that has certainly been true over the last year since the Paris summit, both in terms of this date and the wider global picture. So the Taoiseach, obviously himself, in Paris, goes off script. You know, he has a script which says, we're serious about climate change, we're going to play our part in it. And then, as Oisin Coughlin in the Friends of the Earth, in his blog about Paris, pointed out, there's a wink to the Irish media to the effect, we're not really going to do any of this because it might infringe on our, as he sees it, our national strategic economic interests, and very particularly his and the government's commitment to the beef sector. So rhetorically, we'll play our part. In reality, we immediately start the special pleading to get us off the hook and to back away from any serious commitment in reducing CO2 emissions, because it would upset the ranchers and the big farmers. And that's pretty much, to my mind, the size of it. Somebody in our office joked as I was on my way over, we might as well have Danny Healy-Rae as the minister, with no disrespect to you, in that effectively, let's just pray to God. It's an act of God, I think Deputy Healy-Rae said, so let's just pray. That's not quite the government's stance. It hasn't worked out very well for any of us, I don't think. Yeah. But in all seriousness, it's not quite praying, but it is sort of the government getting down on its knees and beseeching Europe to give us special opt-outs on the basis of the beef sector. And that's just not acceptable. When you look at I think it's in the last week or two, the UN World Meteorological Organization saying we've passed yet another very, very serious, worrying, dangerous milestone in terms of climate change, in that the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, I didn't hear your speech earlier on, you may have referred to this, but it was obviously well trumpeted in the media in the last few weeks, has now gone 44% above the levels of the Industrial Revolution, and is the highest concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere ever. And of course, CO2 is the major, is the most guilty greenhouse gas in terms of climate change. So It's a very serious matter, but our stance is essentially to put the narrow short-term interests of a particular sector of the Irish economy. And when I say that, by the way, and I'll go on to elaborate this point, I don't mean farmers. I don't mean your ordinary farmers or rural Ireland. I mean your big ranchers. The people who contribute to the stunning fact I saw in the CSO report hasn't been trumpeted enough. The CSO report, where they were talking about the distribution of wealth and assets in this country, it showed the amazing fact that the top 10% of the Irish population own 90% of the land. 90% of the land. Incredible concentration. I mean, I haven't done the comparison, but I'm going to at some point. Is that a higher concentration of land ownership than we had under the British landlords and the aristocracy? I suspect it might be. That's an incredible fact. And quite frankly, we're not going to deal with climate change while that remains the case. And there's no doubt the big ranchers, the big beef exporters and so on account for a fairly heavy proportion of that quite obscene concentration in land ownership. And I think successive governments have essentially been hostage to these interests and consequently do not want to do anything that might infringe on those interests. And the Taoiseach was very explicit really about that and where his priorities and allegiances lie, and really to hell with the environment and the rest of it because of those allegiances. In the first instance, there has to be a radical break from that sort of thinking, because we are going to suffer. The majority, not just the planet, future generations, and of course that is the most important group, to sell out future generations, to sell out our children and grandchildren because of narrow, short-term interests and the profits of the small minority is utterly unacceptable and retrograde. But even as we speak, this stuff is impacting on us. And the flooding that we have seen, the very serious flooding, which has done immense damage in rural Ireland, to small farmers and so on, primarily rural Ireland, although it's affected urban areas as well, has cost us an absolute fortune, is a disaster, and it is something that is almost certainly going to recur. And this is the real impact of climate change. And Ireland is, according to some reports, I've quoted them in here before, I don't have the facts here, but Ireland is actually, I think, the most susceptible country in all of Europe to this sort of environmental catastrophe and the damage that flooding can potentially do in this country. So it's already really affecting us and costing us a fortune, and it will cost us a fortune going into the future. So we have to act urgently, and we're not doing it. And oh God, my time is running out already. So let me just say very, very quickly what has to happen. I mean, I didn't hear your figures on money. Oisin Coughlin makes the point that the 175 million that was mentioned by the Taoiseach, I think at the end of last year, in fact was just recycled money, and there was no serious commitment to extra money. Maybe the Minister can tell us this for climate change action. Is there any serious ramping up of investment in the whole number of areas we'd need serious investment in to deal with climate change? Is there any serious ramping up? But let me just flag a few of the key issues. We need a massive ramping up of investment in public transport. Public transport. That means cheaper fares. It means more subsidies for public transport. And we're moving in the opposite direction of that. Cutting subsidies. Fares going up. So there has to be dramatic and radical action in this. In the area of forestry, which is potentially a win-win in terms of employment, jobs and climate change, we are failing disastrously even vis-à-vis our European partners. The best conditions for growing trees in the whole of Europe and the lowest level of forest cover in the whole of Europe. And a point I don't have time to elaborate now, but because of the market-led approach to forestry, the Woodland League told me that farmers who were even growing trees are cutting them down too early because the grants run out too early and because their approach to forestry is being dictated by the market. So they sell when the price is high rather than leave the forests for a long time, which means actually deforestation is happening. And Cuilcha is incredibly, because of state aid rules, the state forest company is prohibited from engaging in afforestation. And we continue to stick with the monocultural model, which is the least effective in terms of climate change, flood mitigation and so on. And of course, insulation. We need a massive state-led investment in a whole area of retrofit and insulation, which could substantially impact. There are other areas I don't have time to go in, but are we getting serious, or are we just doing the special pleading and the rhetoric?